This document was classified for 30 years. FBI Case File 62-HQ 83894, Section 10, 184 pages. For 3 decades, the Bureau told the public one sentence: UFOs were not their concern, not their jurisdiction, not their problem. That sentence appears in dozens of signed letters across this file, stamped, indexed, mailed by agents acting under direct order from the director. J. Edgar Hoover ran the FBI for 48 years. He was a man who built his career on the rules of jurisdiction. He fought presidents over it. He fought the CIA over it. He refused investigations that did not fall cleanly inside his lane. And yet the archive tells a different story. Behind the polite refusals, behind the form letters signed Hoover, the Bureau had quietly opened a file. Not a memo, not a single report, a multi-section internal record on the exact subject the FBI swore it was ignoring. The outside of the briefcase said one thing. The inside contained something else entirely. Section 10 of that file is now public. Every page is on record. And what those pages document, the names, the cross-agency requests, the surveillance of American citizens who ask questions, does not match the position the FBI held in public for 30 straight years. Before this is over, you will see the day the White House called the FBI to ask where UFO reports were going, and you will see the answer they were given. This is the file that shouldn't exist. That should have been the end of it. A case closed, a chapter finished. But someone decided to keep writing. Between 1947 and 1977, the Federal Bureau of Investigation received letter after letter from American citizens reporting objects in the sky. Housewives, pilots, veterans, teachers, schoolboys. They wanted to know if anyone was looking. J. Edgar Hoover developed a solution. Not an investigation, a template. The response was identical every time. Typed on official letterhead, signed by hand or stamp. The line reads, "This Bureau is strictly an investigative agency of the federal government, and neither makes evaluations nor draws conclusions as to the character or integrity of any organization, publication, or individual." Clean, bureaucratic, final. The template appeared under Hoover's signature from the late 1940s until his death in 1972. Then it continued under his successor, Clarence Kelly. The last documented use in Section 10 is dated June 15, 1977. 30 years, the same answer, delivered to citizens who believed something was in the sky. On August 31, 1966, a woman named Florence C. Dow wrote to the FBI from Goffstown, New Hampshire. She was about to turn 63. Her husband had died 15 months earlier. She had worked at the same insurance company in Manchester for 44 years. Her letter was not hysterical. She asked a careful question. She subscribed to a small UFO magazine. She wanted to know if her name appearing on its mailing list could be misread as a communist association. She wanted reassurance from her government. 6 days later, Hoover replied. The same template, the same refusal. This bureau is strictly an investigative agency. She had not asked for conclusions. She had asked if anyone was paying attention. Here is where the official story breaks down. The Air Force ran Project Blue Book from 1947 to 1969. The Bureau had no airspace authority. The division of labor was clean on paper, but the template does not say, "We have no jurisdiction." It says the Bureau neither makes evaluations nor draws conclusions. That is not a statement about authority. That is a statement about policy. You do not refuse to evaluate something unless evaluation has been ruled off limits. And you do not use the same refusal letter for 30 years unless the question keeps coming back. It means someone is keeping 2 sets of books. October 3rd, 1966. The same week Hoover sent his form reply to Mrs. Dow. Los Angeles Field Office. An agent opens a new folder. Classification, Internal Security, file number 100-24442. Subject: The Amalgamated Flying Saucer Clubs of America. The same magazine Mrs. Dow had written about, the same magazine Hoover's letter had said was none of the Bureau's concern. 6 days after Hoover mailed that answer, Los Angeles began surveillance on the publication. The trigger was an IRS officer in Philadelphia named Jarvis H. Cooper. Cooper had subscribed because his son was interested in flying saucers. He read the July 1966 issue and flagged it to the Bureau. The article on pages 2 and 3, in the FBI's own internal language, expounded the Communist Party line. Here is what the article actually was. It was credited to a being called Master Kalen Lee Retan, allegedly transmitting from a planet 400 light-years away. The content was a critique of the Vietnam War and what it called the military-industrial complex. That was what the IRS flagged. That was what the Bureau opened a case on. The Los Angeles office documented the AFSCA headquarters, 2004 North Hoover Street, Los Angeles, California. They indexed the magazine's editors. They cross-checked the name Bob Renault, the radio operator who claimed to receive the transmissions. The Bureau memo notes, and this is the line that matters, no investigation has ever been conducted on captioned organization. That was a lie of omission. The file was opened. The address was logged. The names were entered into the indices. Whether or not Los Angeles called it an investigation, the surveillance machinery had been switched on. And the case carried a 100 series number, the FBI's prefix for matters of national security. July 25, 1967, Newark Field Office. Different agent, different folder. The subject this time was a British-born naturalist and author named Ivan Sanderson. Oxford-educated, a regular on American network television. Sanderson had been working on a book about unidentified aerial objects, and somehow 2 chapters of his unpublished manuscript, chapters 13 and 14, landed on the desk of an FBI agent in Newark. The Newark memo runs 3 pages. The agent reviewed the manuscript for possible violation of the impersonation statute, a law that forbids unauthorized use of federal credentials. Sanderson's chapters had referenced the FBI and the CIA in passing. The Newark office wanted to be sure he had not claimed to be one of their agents. He had not. The memo concludes there was no violation. But the chapters were not returned to him. They were not destroyed. They were filed under case number 62-0 and cross-referenced to the main UFO file in Washington. The 62 prefix is what the FBI calls administrative miscellaneous, a catch-all, a category for things that do not fit anywhere else. Administrative miscellaneous files do not normally get cross-referenced to active investigations, unless the active investigation needs them. By mid-1967, internal FBI records show multiple case folders involving UFO-related materials, surveillance of civilian research groups, reviews of unpublished manuscripts, background checks on people who wrote to Congress about sightings. None of them led to charges. None of them were ever publicly disclosed. During the same period, the Bureau issued letter after letter to journalists, researchers, and members of Congress, each one repeating that the FBI had no interest in UFO phenomena and maintained no files on the subject. Letters going out the front door said one thing, folders growing in the back office said another. The files were not about spacecraft. They were about the people who talked about spacecraft, who wrote about them, who organized around them, who asked questions out loud. And the system was filed under the wrong category on purpose. That filing cabinet was about to get much, much fuller. January 17, 1967, Chesapeake, Virginia, 4:10 in the morning. A man named James W. Collins picks up the phone and calls the FBI's night supervisor. He owns a television repair shop on Great Bridge Road. He tells the agent on the line, Special Agent A.R. Ware, Special Investigative Division, that on his way home from his shop the night before, an oblong, transparent craft landed in the street in front of him. He says it was operated by beings under 4 feet tall, wearing trouser pants and t-shirts. He cannot account for the hours between 8 in the evening and 4 in the morning. Agent Ware writes in his memo, "Collins spoke in a coherent manner, although he appeared to be under certain emotional strain. He claimed he had not been drinking any intoxicants." The Bureau ran a check. Collins had no prior record. The report was typed up, dated, forwarded for distribution, not investigated, distributed. June 1967, Miami Field Office. A man walks in carrying 2 photographs. His name is Paul L. Pyrel, Austrian-born, naturalized American since 1958, a mechanic at Eastern Airlines. The photos are dated November 1944. They show a disc-shaped aircraft on a runway in Vienna. Pyrel had been a pilot for the German Luftwaffe before the British shot him down in March 1945. He had photographed the craft himself. He still had the original negatives taken on a 30-second time exposure. He recites for the FBI fuel and engine specifications he copied off a board in the hangar: a chemical mixture, rocket motor measurements, rotational drive speed over 2,000 meters per second. 23 years had passed. He remembered them anyway. The Miami memo notes, Pyrel exhibited no emotional nor mental disorder and appeared to be rational. The Bureau forwards the entire package to the United States Air Force. October 9, 1967, Dallas Field Office. A young woman walks in and refuses to give her name. She says she will not identify herself because if her claims are false, she will look foolish. She tells Special Agent Earl O. Cullum that in July of that year she met a being from another planet who had taken human form, and that she now receives messages from non-earthly sources. She gives 4 specific dated claims. An anti-missile fired at a UFO over Africa, May 22, 1962. A UFO detected at 22,000 miles from Earth on August 6, 1967. A UFO over Antarctica on August 20. A UFO shot down over the distant early warning line in the past week. The Dallas office sends 6 copies of her report to FBI headquarters. 1 additional copy goes to the Air Force Office of Special Investigations at Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma. None of these reports trigger an investigation. Every single one triggers a distribution. May 16, 1969, 12:50 in the morning. A man named Forrest E. Wood calls the Bureau from California. He says he is a former CIA agent. He says he has been seeing flying objects. He asked to speak with Hoover personally. Special Agent Stephen F. McInerney writes in his memo, "From Wood's tone of voice, it appeared he was intoxicated. He advised that he was recently discharged as a patient from the psycho ward of a veterans hospital. If a witness is unreliable, that should be the end of it. It is not the end of it." Liaison Agent Papich, the man who carried messages between the FBI and the CIA, initiates a full CIA indices search on Forrest E. Wood. The result comes back negative, but the search happened. You do not run a cross-agency clearance check on someone you have already dismissed. You run it because somewhere in the back of the file, his name might already be there. June 20, 1971. An anonymous letter arrives at the Pentagon. The writer claims that within 7 months, copies of top-secret UFO documents will be sent to the New York Times, the way the Pentagon Papers had been sent to the Times just weeks earlier. The letter names a General Wolf as the former head of an Army UFO support program operating out of the Pentagon during the Eisenhower administration. The Pentagon does not throw the letter away. The Pentagon does not pass it to a press office. The Pentagon files it under reference number 62 HQ 83894. 1 month later, the Avalanche, July 23, 1971. A memo is generated by the Department of the Army, classification code DAMI DOI-DES, signed by Lieutenant General Alfred G. Keggins, Chief of the Counterintelligence Division. Distribution list: FBI, CIA, United States Secret Service, Naval Investigative Service, Defense Intelligence Agency, Air Force Office of Special Investigations, Army Security Agency, Army Intelligence Records Repository, plus 2 more, 10 intelligence entities, 1 memo, 2 years after Project Blue Book had officially closed. If Blue Book was the end of UFO investigation in the United States, no military intelligence would flow on the subject after December 1969. But the memo exists. It is dated. It is signed. It is distributed across the highest levels of American intelligence infrastructure. The pattern was never what they investigated. The pattern was what they coordinated. A television repairman in Virginia, a Luftwaffe pilot in Miami, an unnamed woman in Dallas, a drunk caller from California, a letter writer with a name in the Pentagon's mouth. None of them knew each other. None of them triggered public inquiries. Every single one of them triggered interdepartmental communication, forwarded, indexed, cross-referenced, stored. The snowball was now an avalanche, and somewhere in Washington, someone was building a map. What bothers me about this file is not the strange sightings. It is not the photographs of the Austrian disc. It is not the woman in Dallas with messages from a planet she could not name. What bothers me is that I read every page of Section 10, and the pattern that emerged was not chaos, it was method. Look at Forrest E. Wood again. The Bureau called him intoxicated, recently discharged from a psychiatric ward, unreliable. And then they ran a CIA background check. You do not verify a man you have already written off. You do not ask Langley to pull records on someone whose own report you have just discounted. Not unless his name might already be sitting in a file you cannot acknowledge. That is not what an agency that does not care looks like. So I went back to the citizen researchers, the people in the file who had spent years asking the Bureau for one simple thing: transparency. On September 17, 1963, Special Agent John S. Castles of the FBI's Norfolk Field Office walked into the Fort Eustis Army installation in Virginia. He was there to interview a civilian employee named Larry W. Bryant. Bryant was not a whistleblower. He was not a leaker. He was a researcher. He wrote letters to government agencies asking about their UFO policy. That was his crime, if it can be called one. The interview was filed. Bryant assumed that was the end of it. For 11 years, nothing happened. On March 31, 1974, Bryant invoked the Freedom of Information Act. He asked the Bureau for any documents in their files about his activities in UFO research. He cited a recent statement by President Nixon about protecting the privacy of American citizens. On April 15, 1974, FBI Director Clarence M. Kelly replied, "The letter is in the file, 3 sentences long. It says the Bureau has no information on Bryant aside from prior correspondence with him and the record of the 1963 interview." That is what Kelly wrote to Bryant. Here is what Kelly did not write. In the internal note attached to that reply, a note Bryant was never going to see, an FBI official explained why Special Agent Castles had been sent to Fort Eustis in 1963 in the first place. The note reads, "The interview of Bryant in 1963 was initiated because of voluminous correspondence which Bryant had sent to federal and military as well as law enforcement agencies. They had been reading his mail for years before they ever knocked on his door. So when Director Kelly told Bryant the Bureau had no such information, he was not technically lying. He was being precise. The Bureau had no information they were willing to release. They had plenty they were willing to keep. Bryant was not the only one. 11 names appear in Section 10 of correspondence who wrote to the Bureau between 1966 and 1974 asking about UFOs, asking for files about themselves, or asking for confirmation of rumors. Mrs. Dow in New Hampshire, Paul Wright in Atlanta, Ray Robinson in Virginia, Glenn Evans in Illinois, Jane Ferry in California, Lon Sarami in New Jersey, Larry Stevens in Oklahoma, Paul Brassington in Ontario, Mary Beth Martine in Pennsylvania, Don Prade in California, Larry Bryant. 11 people, 11 years, one template denial. The defendant asks the court for the evidence against him. The judge says there is none. The prosecutor sits quietly, holding a folder under the table. And 11 years later, after enough public pressure, the folder is opened. And inside are documents older than the defendant's first request. That is not negligence. That is not bureaucratic overload. That is a system designed to outlast the question. Larry Bryant spent over a decade believing the government had nothing on him. The government spent that decade reading his mail. The safe answer is that all of this was procedure. Miscellaneous filings, interagency courtesy, the way large governments move paper. Nothing here worth a second look. That is the explanation most people accept. It is clean. It lets the story close without leaving residue. But miscellaneous files are not routed across 10 national intelligence entities. The CIA does not coordinate with the Defense Intelligence Agency over routine correspondence from housewives in New Hampshire. The Naval Investigative Service does not maintain interest in a television repairman in Chesapeake unless his name has already crossed someone's desk in a context that cannot be publicly named. That is not bureaucracy. That is classification. Not bureaucracy, because miscellaneous files do not survive 30 years of administrative transitions. They are purged. They are boxed up for storage and forgotten. They do not get cross-referenced through 3 FBI directors and 7 presidential administrations. Not coincidence, because the 62 prefix system held steady from 1947 through 1977. The routing never stopped. The distribution lists kept growing, and not just an Air Force handover, because the interagency communications did not stop when Project Blue Book closed on December 17, 1969. They continued for 8 more years, through directors and administrations who never publicly acknowledged the file existed. June 14, 1977. Stanley Schneider, an official in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, calls the FBI. He is calling on behalf of Jody Powell, President Jimmy Carter's press secretary. The question Powell wants answered is direct. The Carter administration has been receiving UFO inquiries from the public. They want to know how the FBI handles such reports. The Bureau's response is on the record. The official answer, given by a senior FBI official to the White House, is that the Bureau refers such information to the Department of the Air Force. Project Blue Book had been closed for 8 years. There was no Air Force UFO office. There had not been one since 1969. Anyone with a calendar could verify that. This was not a clerk reading from an outdated script. This was a senior official receiving a call from the president's press secretary. He gave the White House a referral to an office that did not exist. The question is not whether he made a mistake. The question is what answer he had been instructed to give when the White House asked where UFO reports were being sent. Because if the reports were still flowing, if the interagency coordination was still running, if the case file system was still active 8 years after the public investigation was closed, then the answer given to the Carter administration was not an error. It was a redirect. You do not send the press secretary of the President of the United States to a dead office by accident. You send him there when the living office cannot be named. Then what? Larry Bryant in Virginia. The Bureau silenced them all. Right now, this moment, in a climate-controlled storage facility at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, the rest of file 62HQ 83894 sits on a shelf. What you watched is section 10. There are other sections. The file did not begin in 1966. It begins decades earlier. It does not end in 1977. It ends, if it ends at all, somewhere we cannot see. What is not in the release sections is the originating directive, the order from the late 1940s that set this system in motion, the instruction that told the Bureau to deny in public and document in private. We have the consequences. 30 years of teletype messages and field office reports and routing slips marked per instructions and as directed. 30 years of a bureaucratic machine running on fuel we are not allowed to look at. We do not have the cause. You are reading a long, careful book. Every chapter is detailed. Dates, names, addresses, cross-references. The binding is intact. But the first chapter, the one that explains why the book was ever written, has been removed. Not redacted, removed. And when you ask why, the answer is national security. The file is real. The pattern is documented. The contradiction is on paper. The motivation remains classified. You can read the surveillance. You cannot read the order to surveil. You can see the chain of reports flowing upward. You cannot see who first told the chain to exist. And the moment you ask, the trail leads to an office that closed in 1969 and a referral that fooled nobody. On June 14, 1977, the White House asked the FBI a question that should have been simple. Why operate a 30-year surveillance system for a topic you claim to ignore? The Bureau did not answer with, "We feared public panic." It did not answer with, "We were tracking Soviet disinformation." It did not answer with, "We monitored fringe groups." Those would have been the easy explanations. Those would have closed the file. Instead, the Bureau gave silence, and then it sent future inquiries to an office that no longer existed. I do not know why the FBI tracked UFO correspondence for 3 decades while telling the public it had no interest in the subject. I do not know what the originating directive contains. I do not know why sections of file 62-HQ-838894 remain partially withheld nearly half a century after the surveillance was supposed to have ended. What I know is this: the file is real, the pattern is documented, and the question that would explain it, the question of who ordered all of this and why, remains classified. Not because the documents have been lost, because the documents that would answer it have never been released. You are living in a country where the consequences of a decision have been declassified. The decision itself has not. That should sit with you longer than any theory about what they were looking for. Because if the originating order is still considered too dangerous to release, in 1977, in 2001, in this year, then whatever was in it has not stopped being true. But what we uncovered today is barely the first page. The US government has just dumped a massive new release of 161 classified files. 161 files they fought for decades to keep hidden. If the first chapter was ripped out to hide who gave the order, what exactly are they still trying to bury in the remaining 160 boxes? To find the missing chapter and decode the rest of this archive, join our investigation and keep questioning truth.